It's the Nittany No Huddle Podcast from the Nittany No Huddle Studios.
Guess we'll just start with Penn State, Indiana history here. 22-2 all time for Penn State over Indiana. Indiana's never won at Beaver Stadium. And we were talking a little bit before the podcast started about the 2020 game. Zach or Deven, do you want to talk about that game and what you remember from that?
Well, I'll jump in there. I've tried to forget it as much as possible, but it was a weird season, obviously, with COVID and just the fact that you have Penn State opening on the road with a Big Ten opponent, something that we've seen this year now, but before these last 2 years was pretty rare. So you had the COVID situation. Who knows how much they were able to actually practice and get together for meetings and whatnot, and then you go out to Bloomington and just a really weird game. Penn State statistically dominated, and I recall them marching up and down the field seemingly at will, and just some horrendous Sean Clifford interceptions that kind of portended the rest of the season for him. And obviously the big takeaway from that game, two takeaways I would say, is one, the incredible diving 2-point conversion from Michael Penix that you could probably go either way on and not really be wrong in terms of whether he got the ball across the pylon or not. And then the big talking point coming out of that game amongst Penn State fans was yet another James Franklin game management situation, we'll call it, with Devin Ford scoring a touchdown when Penn State was up 1 and Indiana out of timeouts that gave them the ball back with an 8-point lead. After the game, it was talked about that in the huddle, everyone knew, and it was said, like, do not score, just go down. So whether to blame the coach, whether to blame the player, it's tough to say. But all in all, it was a weird game during a weird season that just sort of, I think, forecasted what ended up being a really down year for Penn State. And that's sort of how I remember it, is that game, they just suffered a heartbreaking loss, and then boom, you play Ohio State the next week, and it just the wheels fell off of the season after that point.
Deven, you want to talk about that game or anything from there?
Yeah, I don't, like Zach kind of mentioned, just trying to forget that game mostly. I don't remember quite as well as Zach always does. Zach always remembers Penn State games super well. The thing I remember the most is that Penn State just absolutely dominated the game. I pulled up the box score just to make sure that I was correct, and I see that the final yards in that game was Penn State 488, Indiana 211, which is absolutely absurd numbers in a loss. Sean Clifford had 119 rush yards and 238 passing yards, but he did have 2 interceptions, like Zach mentioned, both very critical at the time.
Like he had 119 rush yards.
119 rush yards. Yeah,
that's absurd.
Yeah. So I like I said, I don't really remember exactly why he had so many rush yards, but to think about him rushing for 119 and Indiana as a team had 211 total yards, they rushed for 41 yards on 26 carries, and we somehow lost the game. So that's what I remember the most about the game. We also had 10 penalties for 100 yards. So add in 3 turnovers and just stupid penalties and time management that good old Coach Franklin is not very good at, was a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, that's how you get upset. So that's a great transition, talking about this game, going into our game this weekend versus Indiana. There's talks about this being a revenge game, and I have a great quote from Penn State's defensive tackle, PJ Mustipher. He said, "We're focused on this week. We can't focus on last year because last year already happened. We can't do anything about that. We can't go back and change it. We're just focused on getting ready for the 2021 Indiana game." And I think that really sets a tone. Like, I think, especially people in the media like to kind of drum it up, like, oh, it's a revenge game. Like, they're going to come out for blood, blah, blah, blah. Like, obviously those players remember that, but it's also a game that they should have never lost. So I think it's more they're reflecting on themselves as Penn State, like, hey, we should have never lost that game, so let's make sure we don't make those mistakes again. I don't know how you guys take that quote or anything about this so-called revenge game.
Yeah, I'll say, and Jordan, you opened with it. This is again a program that has never won in Beaver Stadium, and Indiana. Nobody can question that they've really in the last few years taken a step forward and kind of get into that middle of the Big Ten conference, and they're kind of knocking on the doorstep. Obviously, beat Penn State and they beat Michigan last year too, and gave Ohio State all kinds of trouble. But at the same time, I think it's one of those things where you take every week one game at a time. And if you're getting too amped up or juiced up for Indiana, I don't know. I hate to make that sound like, we're Penn State and Indiana's not worth our time. And I guess that's what it sounds like. But I think every game, and Franklin preaches the 1-0, 1-0, 1-0 stuff that he tweets all the time. And I think it's kind of corny, but I think this is a good week where let's see if that type of mentality that the coaching staff preaches actually holds true, because I think if it does, this is just another important Big Ten game. Again, Indiana's maybe down a little bit, but this is a game where, just with the talent that they have, I don't think you even need to think about the revenge factor to get amped up for a game like this when you're the number 4 team in the country.
Yeah, I agree completely. And what I kind of take away from all this 1-0 talk is, what, like, no matter the opponent, you got to go out and beat them. And everybody always talks, the Big Ten title goes through Columbus. Well, no, it goes through every single Big Ten school, because you have to win every single Big Ten game or you're most likely not getting to the Big Ten title. So, yeah, it's Indiana. Yeah, they've never won in Beaver Stadium, but we got to take care of business this weekend. And we'll go through Indiana's side of things. But just in general, talking about Penn State, we have some questions too, like, is our defense that good, or have we just played nobody with a good offense? So I have our stats at we're averaging 14.3 points per game. That's really good, in my opinion. I have another stat line that we've held 5 red zone drives scoreless, and we're limiting opponents to a third down rate of 36%, which I think is phenomenal. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about our defense, Deven.
Yeah, I think it's a little combination of both. Quite honestly, obviously, I think that this defense is very good, and I think that the pieces we have from the front line all the way back to the secondary, and even some of the reserve players, have proven that they can stop opposing offenses. But I think it also doesn't hurt that we've played Wisconsin, whose offense is very one-dimensional, as we saw them against Notre Dame this weekend. We've played Villanova, an FCS school. And the other 2 games in there, neither of those have explosive offense. Even Auburn is probably the closest explosive offense we've seen, and they did not do what they do best against us by running the ball, part of which we discussed in detail. So I don't think I really need to beat that dead horse. But I think it's a little combination of both. I think our defense is really proving to be one of the best defenses in the Big Ten, but I think this will be another step forward. Can we hold Indiana to single digits? Can we hold Indiana to under 250 total yards of offense? I think those are kind of goals in my mind against an Indiana team that is solid, but not on the level that Penn State thinks they're at right now. So I think those are the questions that I have.
Yeah, just to echo that, we have some phenomenal playmakers on defense. Our defense has 5 interceptions, which is a lot for this early in the season, considering all of last year we only had 4. So we're definitely getting chances. I think I saw somewhere there's been a couple of, I want to say like 4 or 5 other interceptions that could have been interceptions that were dropped. So there's definitely some significant improvement on the defense. Castro Fields doesn't have an interception yet, but I saw a stat today that he's been targeted 17 times and he's only let 8 completions happen. And then our nickel quarterback, Jaquan Brisker, has been difficult to throw against as well. Just 6 completions on 13 attempts towards him. So with those kind of players in your backfield, we have definitely the opportunity to take the ball away, and we've been shutting people down. So I think Indiana will be a good game to kind of get a feel. Can we actually stop a legitimate offense? Because I think Indiana does have a pretty good offense. Other than that, I've been looking at our stats, and I can't tell if we have a really bad running game or if teams have just been selling out to stop the run and want to see if Clifford can beat them. So Zach or Deven, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll say I've seen some comments online from Penn State fans that just I think offhandedly have just assumed that maybe Auburn and Wisconsin, I think we can pretty safely say is probably going to be a pretty solid run defense. I think probably can say the same thing about Auburn. We're going to really find out who Auburn is in the next couple of weeks with the game at LSU on Saturday, and I was kind of shocked to hear this from what has been a pretty proud SEC program, but I just read today that they have not won in LSU since 1999. So that'll be an interesting game to watch with the quarterback controversy. But so I think there's been a lot of getting back to the comments I referenced. A lot of folks I think have just offhandedly assumed that defenses have been stacking the box against Penn State and forcing us to throw. And frankly, I haven't really seen that. And I think if you're a defensive coordinator, I don't know why you would be doing that, because at this point, I think you're scouting Penn State and you're seeing Dotson and Washington and Lambert Smith and a Clifford that is at this point starting to show that he's locked in this year. So I don't know that it's a situation where teams are just stacking the box and that's why we can't run the ball. I'm a little bit more concerned about it than that. But, I think this will be a good opportunity to really see what the story is, because I think Indiana has been pretty solid. I know they've given up. They lost to Iowa 34-6, and they lost to Cincinnati 38-24. But in the Iowa game, I know for sure there was 2 pick sixes that Penix threw. So defensively, I don't think the score lines necessarily show what Indiana is capable of. So I'm interested to see, hopefully, the running game take the next step.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm hoping that we can get that run game started. So let's talk about Indiana. They're 12.5-point underdogs for this weekend, which seems kind of high. Indiana usually plays us pretty well. So we'll see if we're really, that big bad number 4 team in the country, like a lot of people like to think we are. So the Hoosiers are actually ranked last in Big Ten scoring defense. They're giving up almost 30 points a game. Like you said, some of those, I don't know if the pick sixes are counted in that. I would assume so, but not sure. But they've allowed 15 touchdowns through 4 games, which seems like a lot.
I think they are. I think they are counted. And then I also just remembered too. So the Cincinnati game was an interesting one because Cincinnati won 38-24, but Indiana took a late lead. Maybe not the fourth quarter, but somewhere in the third quarter they took a late lead. And then, similar to the Wisconsin Notre Dame game, gave up a kick return for a touchdown, and Cincinnati never looked back, and that was sort of the turning point in the game. And of course, you got to cover kicks. That's point being, I think the scoring numbers against the Indiana defense may be a little bit slanted by some non-traditional touchdowns that were scored in some of their bigger games.
Yeah, I was questioning that as well, so I'm glad you brought that up. Next thing, looking at, we got Penix. It seems like he's down from what he was last year. I saw his stats. He's only completing 55%. Not that great. Against Western Kentucky, he was only 35 for 53. Now, granted, he had 373 yards, which is a big outing. But my biggest concern with Indiana is they have been dominating, controlling the clock. They're ranked 17th in the country in time of possession with over 33 minutes. And if we know anything about Penn State football, is we typically don't play that style. Now this year we have been playing that more. Like we were almost split with Auburn with time of possession, but I know against Wisconsin we did not have a lot of time of possession. So I'm worried that they're just going to try and limit mistakes by taking as much time as possible. Deven, do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, just one other number to kind of reemphasize what you're saying there is that Indiana's averaging, I think it's 76 total plays per game, which is pretty high. Just as a comparison, Penn State right now is averaging 65 plays per game. So I think that kind of goes into that time of possession as well. Penix, like you said, hasn't looked as sharp as he looked last year, but I'm not sure exactly why that is. Again, you're playing at Iowa, who I think is one of the best Big Ten teams, not just ranking wise, but just in general. I think they're going to end up near the top of the Big Ten. Cincinnati, we've all talked about that they could potentially run the table and steal a spot in the college football playoffs. So maybe those two games kind of are impacting that. But for him to only be 77 of 140 and a 4 touchdown to 6 interception ratio through 4 games, I would be a little concerned if I was Indiana. So that's where I'm at with them.
Yeah, and to go along with that, last year through 4 games, Indiana only had, or their margin was +8 on the turnover department. This year, they're -2. So that's definitely a big concern. With that as well, I saw that they are getting a lot of pressure against Penix. So that could be, leading to some of those bad throws. He's been sacked 7 times and pressured 39. So that's a lot of pressure. So it seems like their O-line's just not what it was last year. And I didn't really do my research. I don't know how many people they lost from last year, what the case is, but I know that they've been giving up a lot of pressure, and maybe it's because they're playing a lot better teams early. So that could be part of it, but I'm not really sure what's going on with their offensive line. Now, in other news, their team's third leading receiver, also their kick returner, DJ Matthews Jr., he sustained a torn ACL last week, so he'll be out. I think that plays a big part in the special teams department. So that's just something to look out for. That's all I have for Penn State, Indiana. Zach, do you want to add anything? And then we can transition into our predictions for this week in college football.
Yeah, I guess I would just say one item as I look through the stats and some of the box scores of the Indiana games is they've, and I think this plays into the question about Penix and some of his numbers this year. It appears that Indiana struggled to run the ball as well. I see they are only slightly ahead of Penn State in terms of average rush yards per game. And again, they've played a couple good defenses, and so has Penn State, I think. But I think part of the issues with Penix is I don't think he is sort of your prototypical quarterback. I think he's a good running threat, but I think he needs that running game so you can use the play action. He's dangerous when you roll him out, get him on the run. I know last year, if you watched that game last year, not just the play at the end where he dove for the pylon, which was frankly a crazy athletic play. If you see how far back, he's on like the 5-yard line and
he was
where
like
he takes off.
6.
It's ridiculous. But he also had a ton of plays where Penn State had him bottled up in the pocket and he just bounced it outside, or he just kind of snaked through a couple guys and just escaped up the middle. So he's a guy to watch, and even if his stats aren't gaudy, he's just a guy that can hurt you. But I think if they get the running game going, that just makes things really problematic for Penn State. So just interested to see if the defense can kind of take the next step and bottle up a team with some explosive players. They've got a couple. Matthews being out is definitely not good for them, but their leading receiver, Ty Freifogel, is definitely a good one to watch. And they've got a tight end, Peyton Hendershot, who had a great year last year. I know he really hurt Penn State as I think like the security blanket type receiver for Penix. So he'll be another name to watch.
Just curious, Zach, before we transition, how much do you think that his ACL injury could possibly be still impacting him, especially in the running game? Is what I've seen a little. Is he doesn't seem as quick to try to run post torn ACL? Is that anything that you've seen too?
Yeah, I think it's definitely got to be at least somewhat of a factor. I've never had to deal with that, but I would imagine playing at that level with as big and fast as these guys are, that there's just going to be a period of time in which you're maybe a little bit hesitant, or just you're not 100% back to speed. And even at this level, the difference between like 90% and 100% can be massive. So that definitely could be part of it. The one thing I would note too, they did lose Whop Philyor, first team all name division, but that was a guy that I think he got drafted, and he's somewhere in the NFL right now, but he was a receiver that was the number one, the kind of the go-to last year, and he hurt Penn State. And so he's a guy that's gone. So they're maybe trying to find out who the new number one is, but
right.
Yeah. with that ACL injury that Penix suffered, immediately I'm thinking of Carson Wentz when he came back from his knee injury and how he just wasn't the same running anymore. So I think that's definitely part of it, and that might also be affecting his ability to throw the ball. He might be getting rid of it a little too soon, not staying in the pocket as long, especially if they're getting pressured as much as they are. So that's something to keep an eye on. I will be interested to see if we can dominate the defensive line like we have been the last couple games. So I think it's going to be a good game. I'll turn it over to you, Deven, if you want to go through your prediction for Penn State versus Indiana.
Yeah, I can kick us off. I would have Penn State 27, Indiana 6. 2 field goals. 27-6.
I like it. How about you, Zach?
I've got 24-17 Penn State.
Oh, barn burner.
All right. I'm going to go a little bit higher. I think we're not going to struggle to throw the ball. And I think if they do play coverage, that our running backs are actually going to have a good game. So I think we are going to win 35-14 is my prediction. So we'll move on elsewhere. We have a whole list of games we're going to be looking at. One I'm very excited for, Friday night game, number 5 Iowa at Maryland. Zach, do you want to talk about this game at all?
Yeah, I'll jump into this one, and this is one of the dreaded Friday night matchups that I think most Big Ten fans hate to see their team play in. But as a fan of a team that's not playing in it, I think this is going to be a fascinating one to watch. And I think different styles makes for great football watching, and I think this is going to be a game where you're going to watch two teams that are going to be trying to do vastly different things when they have the ball. So Iowa, of course, is going to play a little bit more slow, a little bit more methodical. They're going to do it their way, and they're going to try to pound the rock and slow the game down and use up clock. And Maryland, of course, on the other side has a lot of talent at the skill positions and a really, perhaps maybe the hottest quarterback in the Big Ten at this moment in Tagovailoa. So they're going to try to get the ball in the perimeter. They're going to try to play fast, get the ball into the hands of their skill players. And Iowa's got a really good defense, but I think this will be the first opportunity that we'll get to see Iowa against some guys that have the potential to get behind them and get the ball over the top. I think, Iowa State's solid, but I just don't think we've seen Iowa and their defense have to go up against an athletic team like Maryland. So I think this game will be interesting to watch just because Maryland's 4-0. They're kind of at that point where you're not sure if they're going to do something this year, or if maybe they're a fraud and Iowa's going to smack them down. And of course, Iowa, you have an undefeated Iowa, top 5 Iowa that's got everything in front of them. So this game kind of has everything for me. I think I saw the line was set somewhere around 3 points favoring Iowa, which is interesting, which seems a bit low based on the rankings, but I think it tells you what Vegas thinks of Maryland's chances, and maybe too just the sort of the oddity of the Friday night road game.
Yeah, Friday night in College Park. We'll get to experience that later this season. But Iowa, I think, is going to take care of business, but I do think it's going to be a close game. I don't want to get anywhere near the spread or anything on betting this game just because I could see it going either way. But with the way Iowa plays, I could see it being a very slow, methodical game for them, like you said, but then have Maryland, going for those quick strikes. So it'll definitely be some great entertainment to watch on Friday night. I'm a big fan of having football to watch a day early. So, Deven, you got anything for this game?
Just a gut feeling here. I think that either Iowa wins big as a kind of a statement win to say where they're at, or Maryland wins close. That's kind of how I'm feeling just gut-wise. Iowa looked really rough last week, and I think that they come in here to College Park and they could very easily just hammer Maryland and beat them by 3 or 4 touchdowns. But I think Maryland will be in the game at least early, and if they're in the game late, then they probably steal it at the end is kind of my gut feeling.
I would also note, Jordan, that we're probably about 2 years to the day from the last time that Maryland was riding in high on an undefeated non-conference and had a home Friday night matchup against a highly ranked Big Ten foe. And I believe they actually canceled classes that Friday. And I think the final score of that game was something like 59-6 or something. So
Yeah.
I'm touting Maryland up, but they've been in this position in the past. And of course, for the Penn State fans, they probably recall the game a few years ago down there where it was just an absolute demolition of Maryland by Penn State. So we'll see if they're ready to kind of take that next step and go from, now all of a sudden, if you're a Maryland player, coach, fan, now all of a sudden everyone's talking about you in a positive way and things are a little bit different, and you're not going to sneak up on teams like you did last year in Beaver Stadium, actually. So it's a different perspective, and you've just kind of got to kind of stay humble, I think, if you're in their shoes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I will say, having been at that game with you, College Park, their stadium was fantastic, in my opinion, for the size of it. It just felt like you felt very close to the field the entire time. So it's kind of different when you're going from like the Coliseum type atmosphere at Beaver Stadium, where it's just so massive, to a very small, condensed like field where you feel like you're on top of the players, to be honest. I don't know if you remember that feeling, but I remember feeling that way. And I remember there being like maybe, I don't know, 1,000, maybe 2,000 Maryland fans in total. It was almost all a sea of white there. So I don't know if you want to talk about the atmosphere there a little bit, if you remember that.
Yeah, it definitely was. It definitely was a heavily Penn State crowd. I do think it's a nice stadium. It's a little smaller than Beaver Stadium, obviously, but just kind of great vantage points from wherever you're at. And again, I think it's one of those programs, especially in the Big Ten East, where it's easy to pick, make fun of the fans and say, look how Penn State came in and took over. But it's also hard when you're getting your teeth kicked in and night out. So, hopefully if you're a Maryland fan and you've got something to cheer about at this point, you would think this stadium Friday night's going to be rocking. It's going to be a raucous atmosphere because you finally have a product on the field that it looks like you can maybe be proud of and might do some things in the Big Ten. And we're going to get to some other teams like that too, which I think makes the Big Ten fascinating this year, especially the Big Ten East. I mean, if you see Maryland pull off this win Friday night, and then you start thinking about the Big Ten East with Penn State and Ohio State and Michigan, who are always there, and all of a sudden this resurgent Michigan State, you've got a Maryland that just beat an Iowa, and then you've got a Rutgers that went into the Big House and probably should have got out of there with a win, and then you've got an Indiana who is clearly no joke. All of a sudden, it starts to feel like the SEC West, where you look around and you're like, well, who are we supposed to beat? Who's the bad team here?
Yeah. Where's the Vanderbilt? Yeah, I just had a great time when we went down there last time, and it could have been the big win. It could have also been that they were serving beer in the stadium. So that's to be determined. But we'll move on. Another Friday night game. So we got two ranked teams playing on Friday night, which I'm super excited about. We get to see BYU versus Utah State. I don't have any really scouting report on this game. BYU, I think, needs to go in there and just take care of business, but it'll give me something to watch if Iowa is beating the brakes off Maryland, and that's not a game. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about BYU at all.
Yeah, it's a big game. I'm excited. You're talking about the old wagon wheel trophy rivalry there. That's just, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah,
I don't think I won that one on NCAA. It's one of the few rivalry trophies that I don't think I ever got a hold of. So
BYU is looking to claim the Utah State championship. They, of course, beat Utah in the first week of the season, who was ranked and expected to be pretty good this year, has not really delivered. So if 4 weeks or 5 weeks into the season, they can have 2 wins over the other schools from Utah in the FBS. And of course, they already have a couple wins over the Pac-12. So this is another game where it's not a flashy game, but Utah State's a solid program, and can BYU continue the march like we talked about on the last podcast to potentially being one of those group of 5 teams that's actually in the mix for a playoff. And I think with these types of games, anybody that they're playing that isn't an elite team, they need to stomp them. I mean, at some point, it becomes about style points. So, which is unfortunate, but I think if you're in their shoes, that's kind of what it has to be about.
Yeah, I agree. And great transition. Speaking of teams that currently own the rights in some states, we got number 8 Arkansas, who obviously has been owning the state of Texas. They're actually going to go way down south, and they're visiting at number 2 Georgia, in which for me I think is the game of the week. I don't know, Devin, if you want to talk about this game a little bit.
Yeah, I think this has huge implications already early in the season for the college football playoffs. We have said in our rankings, I know Zach has Arkansas in 4th or 5th. I drawing a blank where you had them, Zach, but I had Arkansas at 4th. Yeah, I had them at 4th as well. It's just a huge game in the SEC. Can Arkansas go in here and beat Georgia? I would say probably not. I don't think Arkansas is quite ready to. I think Georgia will end up kind of crushing them. But if Arkansas goes in and beats Georgia, then it makes for quite the mess in the college football playoff landscape. And suddenly you have Arkansas in their own driver's seat to control their destiny into the college football playoffs.
Yeah, and I think with that being said, I think Arkansas would go to. I would have to put them at number 1 if they beat number 2.
They have to be.
They have to be. Yeah, I mean they will have the most impressive resume out of anybody. They beat Georgia, beat Texas A&M, beat Texas. So I'm very excited to watch this game. I didn't get to watch very much of the Texas A&M game, so I'd like to get a full scouting report on Arkansas and see, is this team legit? They very well could be. Zach, I don't know if you want to talk about any of that aspect of this game, but I'm really looking forward to it.
I think a couple of things with the game last week being such a big game for Arkansas, sort of a coming out party, playing at Jerry World, obviously, and although it necessarily maybe doesn't matter to the kids that are playing in this game, Arkansas and Texas A&M is actually like an old rivalry from the old Southwest Conference days. So you got to wonder. You see this in college sports, college football, college basketball a lot. Something I mentioned last week compared to the NFL, where everyone sort of treats every week the same. Can they come out with the same energy that they had this past week for the A&M game? Can you back that up two straight weeks? Can you come out with that same type of energy, especially here where it's going to be a true road game in a pretty hostile environment? I wouldn't be surprised. I think they can hang with Georgia. Again, I said last week, I need to see Georgia's offense do it against somebody with a pulse. So we'll see, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Arkansas hang around. I just don't know if they're able to kind of pull it off 2 weeks in a row. But I absolutely agree. If they were to beat Georgia at Georgia, there should be not a single vote for the number 1 team in the country for any other school other than Arkansas if they were to pull it off this week.
Even if Bama goes in and just waxes Ole Miss?
I would still say Arkansas because I'm pretty sure Bama's at home.
Yeah, they are.
So
yeah, number 12 versus number 1.
And something I mentioned last week, we know about Arkansas at this point. Again, something we talked about throughout is when you're 4 games into the college football season, a lot of times there's teams that you just don't know anything about. I don't think we know anything about Ole Miss. So I am
right.
Then that's maybe a good segue to the next game. I'm interested to see what Ole Miss is, but they haven't shown anything yet. So I think if Georgia annihilates Arkansas, that's a big win for Georgia because we know what Arkansas is. We saw them beat Texas. We saw them spank Texas. We saw them beat a solid, if unspectacular, A&M team. So we know what they are. So I think the outcome of the Georgia-Arkansas game tells us something about both teams, whereas if Alabama beats Ole Miss pretty handily, I think you can say that's a good win, but we won't know for a few weeks until Ole Miss plays a few more SEC games to really know what that win meant. So for that reason, I would say absolutely, if Arkansas pulls this off, they're the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah, and moving on to Ole Miss, Alabama. I know nothing about Ole Miss other than
they have awesome baby blue helmets.
Yeah, I mean, they have great jerseys in general. I think we discussed this in our group chat the one day. Definitely top 5 jersey and helmet combo, in my opinion. But yeah, and they have Lane Kiffin, and that's about all I know. So I couldn't tell you who they've played this year so far. I didn't really look into it that much. I don't know, Deven, if you know that offhand, who they've actually played.
They beat Louisville by 20, beat Austin P, I think.
Austin Prey?
Austin P 54-17 and Tulane 61-21.
Okay.
Yeah, so at least they're blowing the teams out that they've
Well, we know
played.
they're better than Oklahoma at least because
Yeah.
they can beat up.
Take care of Tulane. Yeah.
Right. So, and they are averaging almost 700 yards per game of total offense. But again, against Austin P and Tulane and even a kind of garbage Louisville team, not sure how much that says, but they're averaging 640 yards of offense per game, which is, I don't care who you play, that's still absurd through 3 games.
Yeah, and so Ole Miss has perhaps the presumptive Heisman favorite at this point. I haven't checked the books on it yet, but I would say Matt Corral is probably, or Corral, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name, but he's definitely up there, and they have a fleet of receivers that can just run and go get it. I don't know if you remember the game last year when Alabama played them in Oxford. I think the final was like 62-47, and it was a track meet.
Right.
And Alabama, it was the worst. I think Nick Saban said after the game it was like the worst defense he's ever seen Alabama play, which is probably just a coach speak for, man, that other team can actually play.
They can ball.
Yeah, so they obviously couldn't stop Alabama, but from an offensive standpoint, you probably got to go back to his Michigan State days to find a time when a Nick Saban defense gave up 47 points. So that'll be an interesting one to watch, just because I think we'll learn a little bit about Ole Miss and we'll maybe see, is Bama perhaps a little bit vulnerable? There'll be something to learn from that game for sure.
All right. And speaking of other noon games, we got number 14 Michigan at Wisconsin. As a Penn State fan, I'm kind of torn. Do we want Wisconsin to beat Michigan here to kind of give them some validity, or do we want to hope Michigan is as high ranked as possible when they visit the big house?
I think as a Penn State fan, we probably want Michigan to win this game. I've kind of given up hope on Wisconsin helping our resume at this point. But if Michigan, is undefeated headed into the game against Penn State, not only will that be a college game day game, that will be a night game, and it will be just absurd if both teams are undefeated at that time.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at it from that perspective, the stink is on Wisconsin and it's not washing off. Just a home win against Michigan's not going to change the narrative based on what we saw. Not just the fact that they lost to Notre Dame, and not just the fact that the score makes it look like it was a blowout, but just the way they basically just sort of handed the game away, kick return touchdown, and then like 2 pick sixes. So, I think if you're getting to the point where we're talking about how, from a scheduling standpoint or schedule strength standpoint, I think a Michigan that just keeps rolling and then sets up a late season game with Penn State, because of course, Michigan's not going to play Ohio State. I don't have Michigan's schedule in front of me, but they obviously play Ohio State at the end. So there's a chance they beat Wisconsin. They may not see anybody. Maybe Michigan State.
They play Iowa, don't they?
After Wisconsin, they play at Nebraska versus Northwestern, at Sparty, and versus Indiana before they play Penn State. And then they play Maryland in between Penn State and Ohio State. So they end with Sparty, Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State. Sparty, Indiana, Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State. So they, if you're a Michigan fan, you're looking at this Wisconsin game, and look, I don't care what you think about Wisconsin. The quarterback's playing terrible right now. You don't go into Madison and come out with an easy victory. So it'll be a tough game, and they're still playing defense in Wisconsin. Don't let the 42 points that Notre Dame scored fool you. 21 of those were with the defensive players standing on the sideline. I don't expect Michigan to get an easy win, but I think this is one where it's sort of a game where we finally learn something about Michigan. They did not really impress in the second half against Rutgers. They kind of just got ahead and stayed ahead and then did nothing offensively in the second half. I don't think they're going to go into Madison and just run the ball 45 times like they have been and expect to get it done. They're going to have to show something through the air, which is what everyone's sort of waiting to see. Can they do that at this point?
Yeah, I agree with you there, Zach. It's going to be a real time for Michigan to show up and, kind of put the haters at rest. If they go into Madison and, can win by 2 scores, I don't know what the line is, but if they can do that, I think they could be, you know, headed towards the top 10 as well. So speaking of teams that have played Wisconsin, the next game we got is number 7 Cincinnati at Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's ranked 11th. Is that correct? 9th? Okay. Yeah, so 7 at 9. This is going to be a phenomenal game too. I don't know if you guys want to talk about this. I know we kind of hit in depth Notre Dame and Cincinnati last week, but I'm excited. I really hope. I want Cincinnati to kind of be that Cinderella team. I just think it's great for college football that we don't have, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson, Alabama in the playoff every single year. I'm kind of a hater because I don't like any of those teams, but I think casual fans are kind of getting sick of seeing the same team. So to have something like a Cincinnati come in there and be kind of an underdog would be awesome. So
Yeah, so I'll go out on a limb, and then we're not doing predictions for all these games. I have Cincinnati winning this game. I think Notre Dame they obviously struggled the first couple weeks of the season. Everybody saw that. They very, very well should have lost to Florida State, who we now know is terrible. Definitely could have lost to Toledo. Didn't look that great against Purdue, and then they had that weird blowout that wasn't a blowout win over Wisconsin. And I just think this isn't a vintage Notre Dame team. And just from the little bit of the games I've watched, it doesn't appear like they have the road grading offensive line that they've had in the past. They've put a lot of sort of I think the secret that nobody talks about at the Notre Dame is they've put a lot of linemen in the NFL over the years. And I just, from what I'm seeing so far, it doesn't look like they have that. The run game is not producing. So I'm calling a Cincinnati victory in South Bend over the weekend.
I'm with you. I think Cincinnati coming off a bye week too. They didn't play last weekend. I think that gives them a little extra time, gives them a little extra advantage. And I agree with you, Zach. I think Cincy goes into South Bend and comes out with a win.
Yeah, I think Cincinnati has everything in their favor, like with momentum and just building. I think there was a lot of emotion in that Notre Dame win. I think Brian Kelly, I forget how many wins he broke with Notre Dame, but I think there was just a lot of emotions wrapped up in that. So I think that might have a factor. So I'll just backtrack a little bit because I want to kind of do a graphic for this anyways. So if you just real quickly give me who you have winning, we'll go through the games we just covered previously, and then I can mark them down. So I'm assuming we all have Penn State winning this weekend. Okay, and then Iowa, Maryland. I think Iowa's going to take care of business, so that's who I got. Okay, so all 3 for Iowa, and then obviously I think we all have BYU. And then what's the next game here? Arkansas, Georgia. I think I'm going to go with Arkansas, to be honest. Oh, Georgia big. All right. And then Michigan, Wisconsin. I think Michigan's going to win that game. In a tight one. Ooh, okay. Oh, I like it. And then obviously we have the Cincinnati Notre Dame game, and I think we all had Cincinnati. So we'll move on to our next game, which we kind of already talked about, the Ole Miss Alabama. I really don't know who to pick in this game. My feeling is I want Ole Miss to win, but that doesn't. I just don't think they get it done against Alabama on the road. So I'm gonna go with Bama. All right, so we're all in line with that. Now we'll move on to the Pac-12. We got number 3 Oregon at Stanford. I don't think Stanford's very good this year. I really don't have any knowledge of what they've been doing. So I don't know if either of you guys want to chime in there, but I'm going to have Oregon winning that game.
State to open the year, and then they beat USC, and they've lost to UCLA. So one thing they have played a lot of legitimate teams so far, so they're battle tested and they're at home. My take on the Oregon game is, and Deven really hit the nail on the head on this in the last podcast, that they really did not play very well, and I think we're pretty fortunate to be playing a really bad Arizona team last week, because I think they were sort of ripe for the upset that week. But I think because of that, the coaches are able to kind of get them back on track and say, hey, look, we're up to number 3. We're not unbeatable, though. Look what happened in this Arizona game that was a nail biter that really didn't need to be. So I think they get back on track and beat Stanford.
Yeah, I have a lot of desire to pick Stanford in this game. I think it's going to be really close. The spread is 8, and I think I think Stanford could cover that spread. I think McKee from Stanford is going to have a big game throwing. He could go off, I think, for 350 yards. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think Oregon does end up winning it, and probably kind of similar to that Arizona game, they end up winning by 20 or 15. But I think Stanford, if I had to make my upset special of the week, it probably would be Stanford. But I just don't think they can quite get it done. They're not quite good enough, I don't think.
All right. Like I said, I really don't know much about Stanford. I've been reading up on my Pac-12 as I got exposed last week by Deven. So, I had it up, and then I was working on some other stuff, and I turned it off. So it's kind of on me. Don't come into the podcast without your facts straight. So moving on to other teams that could have been upset in the past few weeks. We got number 6 Oklahoma at Kansas State. I think Oklahoma will probably take care of business this week. They've been pushed to the limits the last 2 weeks. So that's just my opinion. Is I think they'll come in and win by 2 scores, but I don't know if you guys have any insight.
I have Oklahoma winning. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I have Oklahoma as well. I will note that, and I think some people might be surprised by this, K-State has won this matchup each of the last 2 seasons.
I did not realize that. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
but I do have Oklahoma. I would be more inclined to pick K-State, but they opened the season with a nice win over Stanford. They lost their starting quarterback, who was a good dual threat quarterback, who I know is definitely the starter last year. He may have been the quarterback of each of the last 2 wins over Oklahoma. So, but he's out for the season, and they lost him. So I think that really took the shine off of what looked like a potentially promising season. They lost a close one to Oklahoma State last week. So I wouldn't be shocked to see this as a competitive game, just because K-State obviously has shown they know how to beat Oklahoma, and Oklahoma has shown nothing this season. So I'm not ready to say that they're gonna demolish a conference foe that on the road that has beaten them in the past.
Yeah,
good stuff there. Speaking of quarterbacks that are or have been tearing it up, we have our next game, Florida at 4-0 Kentucky with Will Levis at the helm. Deven, you want to talk about that game a little bit?
Yeah, I think as Penn State fans, it's cool to see Will Levis get his shot down there. His lines still aren't as great as 4-0 indicates. Just looking at his numbers, he has 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, but then you compare that to Florida's quarterback, he has 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So that's never good. But I think that this is going to be one of those quintessential SEC football games. I think it's going to be really low scoring. I think it's going to be just a 1 or 2 possession game throughout the entire game. No one's going to take a lead by a lot. And I think Florida ultimately wins the game, but it's going to be super low scoring, like a 17-10 game or something like that. It's just how I feel about it. I don't know about Kentucky's defense. I haven't really watched Kentucky, but I don't know how their defense has been this year. I just don't think that Florida is that great either, other than losing to Bama. They did play well in that game.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Florida, but I'm not super confident about it. I will say it's hard to pick Kentucky to win against Florida when they have not done that in Lexington since 1986. And mind you, these are teams that have played every single year.
Right.
So they did beat Florida in Gainesville a couple years ago. I'm not sure about Kentucky's defense either to back up Deven. I will say, just from keeping an eye on them, because their starting quarterback is obviously a former Penn Stater, they have really struggled on offense the last couple weeks. One of the games being against Chattanooga. So I don't know if there's enough offense there to hang with Florida, but it's at home, and again, it's a matchup where they should be just absolutely out for blood because Florida has had their number. So we'll see, but I would say Florida is going to get it done.
So I am going to pick Florida, but I think they're going to kick a field goal with less than 2 minutes left in the game to win it. I think it's going to be very close, and I think it's going to be more high scoring, to be honest, because I don't think either team's defense is really that good. So I'm going to say probably 20. Let's see here. Yeah, probably I don't know, 28-31 is probably what I'm going to pick for that game. Move on to another two teams that are 4-0. We have number 21 Baylor, which I think has played pretty well. And then they're at 19 Okie State. Zach, you want to talk about this game?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because it's sort of an under the radar matchup of two undefeated teams. I don't think we have that many of those on the docket this week. We've got a few. We've covered a few, but potentially you're looking at this matchup as whoever comes out of this one is maybe the heir apparent to challenge Oklahoma for the title. If you're Baylor and you start your Big 12 run with they beat Kansas a couple weeks ago, which everyone will, but then they beat Iowa State at home last week, which was a big win. A lot of people had Iowa State, frankly, in the top 10 in the country to start the year. And then, so if you parlay the Iowa State win with a road win at Oklahoma State, then they're sort of off to the races. They're 5-0. They have a couple Big 12 wins, and they're a team that you're maybe looking at as, are they going to challenge Oklahoma for the Big 12? Same thing in the other direction. If you're Oklahoma State and you hold serve at home against Baylor, you've got the win over K-State. They had an interesting non-con road win at Boise State, so they've got a going as well. So I'm interested to see who comes out of this one, just to kind of see if we can start to get a feel for Oklahoma being down. But is there somebody that's going to take advantage of it? Is the question that I have.
Yeah, I'm right with you there. I really think Baylor is been looking good. I'm riding high on Baylor, so I'm going to keep it with them. I think they get it done at Oklahoma State this weekend. Deven, your turn.
Yeah, I honestly have no idea what's going to happen in this game. I have no good read on either of these teams. I know Jordy's really high on Baylor, but I just see a close game against Texas State on the road, which is weird to think that Baylor played at Texas State, and then crushing Texas Southern and Kansas. You should do that. Anybody should do that, basically. And then a tight win over Iowa State that, again, like Zach said, a lot of people were really high on before the season, and they haven't really performed up to that level. And then you look at Oklahoma State, who has barely beat Missouri State, barely beat Tulsa, somehow went into Boise and won by 1 point, and then beat Kansas State last week. So I don't think either of these teams are that impressive, but I don't have a good read on them. I think this game will tell us a lot about where they're at, and like Zach said, where the Big 12 is at. Can either of these teams beat Oklahoma? So I think I'm going to take the Cowboys close.
Pistol Pete.
And Jordan, I realized I didn't actually make a prediction, but I am going to also take Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy is probably my favorite coach in America.
I mean, he's definitely up there. I do have a shirt, a Baylor Bears long sleeve shirt I bought in Waco, so I'm gonna be repping that when I watch them play. I think that's a evening game. Yeah, same time as Penn State game. So I might have a couple screens up watching all the games, but Moving on to other evening games, we have number 22 Auburn at unranked LSU. This is a must win for Auburn, and as a Penn State fan, we want Auburn to go in there and beat the brakes off LSU. I know we kind of talked about the SEC a little bit earlier, but Deven, do you want to talk about Auburn at LSU?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the biggest nail on the head there. We need Auburn to go in here and play well, and a win here at LSU would be huge for Auburn and huge for Penn State. Even though I don't think LSU is where they need to be, it looks like LSU is favored in this game, which I think is semi surprising to me. But I actually will take LSU to win this game. Unfortunately.
So not that surprising then.
To think of Auburn being ranked number 22 and LSU not being ranked and LSU is that big of a favorite at home, I guess they just assume that LSU's home field is that big of an advantage, which those Auburn fans told us it was way better than Penn State. So I guess I should have known that.
I think Zach has something to say about that.
I've got LSU as well. I just think it's really hard to have confidence in Auburn right now. Not just because they had the squeaker versus Georgia State, but when you throw in the uncertainty at quarterback, and I've read Brian Harsin this week is sort of playing it a little bit close to the vest. I don't know how you don't roll with Finley after the last game. The problem is Finley just transferred from LSU. So, starting a young guy in a situation like that where he's now you throw him out to the Wolves against what I'm assuming is probably a decent defense at LSU in a night game in the stadium that he used to play in. So it just seems like one of those situations that is going to be a little bit too much for Auburn, but I'd love to be wrong, but I'm going to roll with LSU on this one.
Yeah, really throwing them to the Tigers there, if you will.
Nice.
I think you missed an opportunity there, Zach, but yeah, absolutely. We want Auburn to go in there and win, and we'll see how it plays out. But I'm looking forward to that game as well. Just all around, so many good games this weekend, and we're gonna cap off with the last big game I have on the schedule here. Number 25, Clemson at undefeated Boston College, which could be a play.
Oh, it's at Clemson?
I think so. Is that right, Zach?
I'm pretty sure it's
in.
I think it's in Clemson.
Can let me yell to my stat person. Hey, go check that. Oh, nobody's here, so I guess I'll have to look it up myself. Give me 1 sec. I'll tell you if it's at Clemson. Maybe I just messed that up. So
I don't know. Everybody plays in Memorial Stadium, so unless you look at the state, it's always hard to tell because that's
Looks
basically every college football.
So I think ESPN had that listed wrong because that's where I was looking at earlier, or I just messed up because it was the last one. But yeah. So Boston College on the road at Clemson, which makes it even better if they win. I know we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves looking at potential Final Four for playoff hopes, but from a playoff standpoint, I wouldn't mind seeing Clemson lose again. Just completely, really they shouldn't have any hope of the playoff. But if Boston College wins, then they're undefeated with a win at Clemson, and they could be the ACC favorite. If they run the table, they might be looking to get in. So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Sorry, Zach. I guess I'll go. I think Clemson takes care of business and just crushes Boston College because I don't think Dabo Swinney was very happy, and I think I'll be on the Dabo Swinney train. I think he's a good coach. I really do. I know some people don't, and some people think he's just overhyped, but I think that Clemson just annihilates Boston College this week.
Yeah, I've got Clemson big in this one. I think they're coming back home. Boston College is without their starting quarterback, so it'll be sort of a tough environment for the backup to come into. I think it's one of those situations where you get a bit of the dead cat bounce, and even if Clemson's down, they're going to show something at some point, and this just seems like one of those bounce back times against a 4-0 Boston College. But if you really get into who they've played, other than the Missouri win last week, which again, Missouri's nothing to write home about, but I think they played like Temple, UConn, and UMass or something. So I've got Clemson big.
Yeah, good stuff. Deven, do you happen to know offhand who Boston College coach is? I can't think of his name, but I've seen it floating around.
Jeff,
I'm not
Jeff Hafley.
Jeff
Jeff
Hafley.
Havley. Yeah, they're talking about him to go to USC.
He's the he's the former defensive coordinator at Ohio State, and with the defensive struggles that Ohio State is having right now, his name is popping up. Partly because I think he's doing a decent job at a pretty decrepit program like Boston College, and also because you're wondering if maybe he was the mastermind behind some pretty good Ohio State defenses over the last few years.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I know that there's been interest in him going to the USC job, so he may be trying to bring his best stuff. I don't know if he's that kind of guy looking for the next step, but I mean, obviously leaving Ohio State as a D coordinator to take over a head coaching job at Boston College, I would think he's probably got bigger aspirations than Boston College. So he may be trying to coach to really impress to maybe get that USC job.
I don't think it's going to matter, though. I just don't think they're that good. I mean, it's the ACC, so.
I mean, I don't think either of them are that good, to be honest. But, all in all, I think it's going to be a phenomenal weekend for college football, and I cannot wait. I actually saw there's a Thursday night game as well. I forget who's playing in it. I don't think it was anybody of importance. But I'm just looking forward to, having college football back. Having fans at the game has made all the difference. I know I said it last year. It didn't feel like a real season with players sitting out. The eligibility rules changed, and not having fans, I think, really hurt a lot of programs. So I'm just happy everything's kind of back to normal, and we have this great, crazy week in college football where a lot of these games could go either way and could have major implications for the rest of the season. So that's all I have for tonight. I don't know if you guys want to say anything else before we head out.
Well, good. Keep an eye on Ohio State at Rutgers, though. We didn't really talk about it, but I think that could be an important game, especially in the Big Ten.
It's at Rutgers, right? All right. That'll be one to watch.
Nothing else from me.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. We'll have another podcast out, hopefully Monday, Tuesday next week, recapping Penn State versus Indiana. Make sure to go check that game out. It's going to be at 7:30. They have the stripe out planned. Hopefully we take care of business, and, depending on how things shake up, we could be looking to move up in the rankings again. So that's all I got from the Nittany No Huddle podcast. Thanks for watching.